right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show we have Zander Schloss. You may know him from his work with the Circle Jerks, Joe Strummer, Mike Watt, Thelonious Monster, the solo work of Bob Forrest, Magnificent Bastards, the Low Sweet Orchestra, the Weirdos, or his work with Sean Wheeler. This interview left me next level inspired. Zander is one of the coolest guys, and this conversation is so insightful and so inspiring, and I can't thank him enough for the opportunity to have had it. It gets pretty guitar heavy, pretty singer-songwriter, philosophy heavy. Zander had this repeating philosophical mindset called urgent necessity. And it's a really profound concept in the context of the story that is unveiled in our interview. And I'll let Zander explain that when we get to it. Zander has a new record coming out called Song About Songs. Singles have been released periodically. The two that are out now are Song About Songs and My Dear Blue. Both songs have a corresponding video that are out. On November 17th, the next single comes out called I Love the Story of My Life, and it's going to have an epic video as well as a single release and a live performance that accompanies it. In February, the album's going to drop, which I can't wait for, because just with these 3 singles that are out, each one's profoundly moving, so a whole record is going to be fantastic. We're going to listen to the Song About Songs. Space and everything about that performance and arrangement is so well done. You can catch Zander with the Circle Jerks. Some tour dates are announced, and I'm sure some solo dates will be coming soon. If you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on all the podcast platforms, helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing those insights with you. So without further ado, here's my interview with Zander. Well, to start it off, how'd the Bazooki gig go?
How did the what?
The Bazooki gig.
Which one?
I forget who it was with. I saw on it was with a female singer.
Oh yeah, I just played the Day of the Dead with a woman named Flora Margot.
Yeah.
Who's she's a big star. Well, I think internationally, but she's based in Mexico. It was really fabulous. She is an incredible entertainer. I've never seen anybody that was so charismatic on stage. She came over the night before, and we brushed through the tunes. I guess she was expecting that everybody would be just as much of a genius as she is. So I was really, kind of like thrown into the fire pretty quickly.
Was it hard to catch up, or was it easy to kind of find the bass?
No, no, it wasn't hard to catch up. I just had to learn the songs and memorize the songs in a quick, turnaround. And I was surprised that when she was on stage, she's like a concert pianist. She's classically trained, and she just kind of like left the piano to engage the audience, and just trusted that I would remember how to play the songs and know the arrangements and the chords and everything like that. It was actually quite sweet that she trusted me in that way.
Right.
And I was able to do it.
Definitely. Well, that's a lot to take in, and especially if it's like something you've never done before. But being familiar with the style of music and like the feel of it, and I guess like even like with the Circle Jerks, like I saw you guys posted your set list, and it's like I don't even know how many songs are on that list, but it's been like 15 years or something since you guys have toured. So do you have a knack for or a trick to kind of quickly remember songs? Are you going by forms, or are you going by progressions?
Well, I mean, there's 32 songs in the course of an hour.
Right.
With the Circle Jerks, all probably somewhere around 200 BPM. For the listeners that don't know what BPM, beats per minute, and they're very, very quick. and so there's an urgent necessity to it that kind of forces you into. It's not so much remembering the notes as much as it is, because most of the songs are in a downstroke fashion, which is very necessary to get that kind of attack. And it's just a matter of muscle memory and dexterity. It's almost, for me, robotic, in a strange way. And I guess it requires good finger positioning and dexterity and technique and knowledge of the fretboard, to travel up and down the neck that quickly. Plus, the fact of the matter is the bass is, the frets are longer. It's a longer neck, and certain cross-fingering positions have to take place in order for you to play these things very quickly.
So it's kind of it's interesting with the circle jerks. It's kind of like it's kind of a muscle memory thing. Um, that's it, because like, does that pan out for something like doing a Bazooki gig like you did, like with like having to learn stuff that quickly? Is that a different process? Would you say then, or is it
Well,
kind
there's
of the
this thing that
same?
I call urgent necessity.
Oh, yeah, that would do it.
And that can work for anything. It's like, okay, this is happening. There's no take backs. We are actually doing this now. You know what I mean? In
Yeah.
real time, and it's going to happen whether you're prepared or not. So you had best be prepared.
So they kind of get caught up. When did music start to become your mode of expression? Did it start with guitar?
Yes, it started with guitar. Previously to guitar, I come from on my father's side, three generations of oil painters and fine artists, and so I was um, pretty much just doing visual art um, most of my life before. Most of my life. I started playing guitar when I was 12, but I had planned to be a visual artist and doing a lot of sketching and charcoal and pastels and pencil drawings and started painting and sculpture as well. But I quickly transitioned when and I don't know how to put this mildly. I quickly transitioned when I went through puberty, because I thought that how am I ever going to get to date any girls when I'm sitting in here in this little studio, at
Yeah.
my easel all alone. And so, yeah, I thought that would be a better medium for me to get the attention that I so needed.
Well, it seems to be that's I was Wayne Kramer's got a kind of similar story too. Like his mom was dating a guy that played guitar, and he's like, "How's he doing?" Like there's definitely an allure to that. So did anyone else in your family play music, or were you just kind of diving into this all on your own? Like everyone else was more visually based.
Yeah, no, I was the first one, and oddly enough, it was like you know my neighbors had a piano, a grand piano next door, and we go over there, and they'd have like dinner parties or cocktail parties, and then all the adults would gather around the piano, like while I was playing, you know, drinking their cocktails or whatever, and go, "Whoa, that's strange. Little Zandy can play whatever songs that he hears on the radio." You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, that's great. So what are you going to do about it? They never actually um, offered to get me lessons or supported me in that.
Yeah.
It was just sort of an oddity. That my ear was so keen. And I actually worked to buy my first guitar. and I got Bob Dylan's um, book of drawings and poetry and lyrics and stuff, and bought the album Nashville Skyline Rag. And as I was still a visual artist, I don't know if you're familiar with the cover of that album,
Yeah.
Nashville Skyline. So it's Bob Dylan posing with a top hat on, and he's got his harmonica holder, harmonica, and his guitar, and he's kind of looking down into the camera. So I also had a harmonica holder and a bunch of harmonicas, and I bought myself a top hat and did a visual drawing of myself um, as Bob Dylan in Nashville Skyline Rag replaced his face with mine. And then once I had enough money to buy my first guitar, I learned Nashville Skyline from front to back by ear. The thing about that was it was so appealing to me because I could really hear what was going on, with Bob Dylan and people like Neil Young and Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and stuff. There, it was so direct, because it was basically, chords, melody, and lyrics.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'd imagine. So it's interesting because like with piano, it's not like you don't really have to worry about how to make the note. You know what I mean? At first, you're like, oh, I push down, it's clear, boom.
Yeah,
Now, and so figuring it out by ear, it's okay, and let's align the pitch. But when you start to get more complicated with like chords and stuff and progressions, that gets a lot. That's a lot to like dictate in real time, and like then to attempt to do it on guitar, it's like a whole nother it's a whole nother feat because you got to figure out, okay, I'm hearing that chord. How's that work? You know what I mean? Like, but I can see how like an artist like Bob Dylan or Neil Young would be a lot easier to kind of or not maybe easier, but more appealing because it's right there.
yeah.
You're not really, it's not hidden underneath anything. And that's
No, it's a great way to start out,
yeah.
and yeah, I won't say that, I mean, I was a natural. I had, you know, a really great ear, but when you start playing guitar, and I don't do this anymore. I would literally have the guitar in my hands 24 hours a day, if I could, and I'd be falling asleep with the guitar in my hand and like concentrating so hard that I would literally drool on the guitar, you know.
Yeah. That
Um,
it's I personally that's very exciting to hear because I did spend a lot of years attempting to do the same thing. You know what I mean? You
yeah,
hear stories like Ravi Shankar would tie his hair up to his sitar when he would nod off to sleep. His hair would be pulled, so he would wake back up and keep rehearsing. And like, there's this like this impulse to spend so much time with this instrument, and like whatever it is for you, and like to be I don't know. So like to hear that people actually do it is not just of legend is refreshing.
well, and there were, like, I had the guitar in my hand so much that I learned this technique where I would watch television, and because my ear was so developed, I would play the TV themes and cartoon themes in real time as they were going on the television, and challenge myself to learn these songs very quickly. And the thing about it is that when you kind of mindlessly go into these things and you're watching TV or you're practicing while you're watching TV, you're taking your mind off of your technique, and you're taking your mind off of actually what you're doing and the guitar itself. There was
Mm,
something about that, kind of almost like hypnotic, stepping away from the actual physical process of it.
right. Well, that makes sense because like when you're ultimately like with any instrument, it's trying to convey what you have to say and technique and like note choice and all that uh, musical thought and theory are all just modes to help further express or convey what you have to say. And
Yeah.
Victor Wooten's got a pretty good bit about people getting caught up in that and spending so much time on like things like notes and technique. And like that sounds like a very like a easy way to kind of avoid that and like dive into that just expressiveness.
Yeah, I mean, I was into getting into. I wanted to get into the meat of everything that I heard. Like, and oddly enough, it's like when I listened to the Beatles, I was like, whoa, there's something happening every kind of half second. There's either a guitar riff or a drum fill or a bass line or a harmony and what's this going on? What's this other stuff that's going on? Like the orchestration, you know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, there's somebody else that's involved in this music that's bringing in, and then it's pretty sophisticated for a little kid. But I was like, oh, production matters, arrangement matters, orchestration matters, the way you assemble a song, these riffs matter. Um, and so I really sort of kind of like listened intently to different aspects and tried to figure out what was the meat of each thing that I was hearing. What was the tenderloin of it.
That's a really profound, especially at that age, to be able to like dissect music like that. Like that's
Yeah,
cool.
kind of weird, right?
Right, but not really because like it's all right there. It's kind of you just got to know what you're listening for. Like but it is like cuz I think of all the kids I work with and if they came at me with some knowledge like that I'd be like, "All right, this will be cool. We can have some
Yeah.
serious convo." But like so like leading into like high school and stuff kind of coming in with like these big ears like to take all this in, did you dive into like music through school or is this more just a private kind of like practice?
Well, I mean, coming from Missouri, I was like into, like I said, starting out, I sort of gravitated towards music that had more of a direct sort of like effect, which
Yeah.
is, chords, melody, and lyrics. So I gravitated towards those musicians. And I also gravitated towards acoustic and sort of more traditional bluegrass stuff. I listened to a lot of Doc Watson
Hmm.
um, because I really wanted to become like a bluegrass flat picker as well. But once I moved to San Diego when I was 13 years old with my mom and her boyfriend, and kind of left St. Louis and my older brother and two older sisters and my dad, I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to achieve my goal, which is to become a rock star. um, and so rather than, stay behind with my friends and everything, I took the chance. I was like, no, I have to leave everything I know, every everything behind. And coming out to San Diego, I started to get into the great guitar heroes, like all the Jimmys, the Jimmy Pages and the Jimi Hendrixes and the Eric Claptons and the Jeff Becks, the guys who could really, really solidly interpret the blues and rock and roll. And of course, coming from St. Louis, going back just a minute, Chuck Berry, like the basically the inventor of rock and roll guitar. The first time I ever performed on stage was at summer camp. I think I played Johnny Be Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, by Chuck Berry. Oddly
Yeah.
enough, later on in my life, we would have Chuck Berry join the Circle Jerks on stage and play "Roll Over Beethoven"
That's
um,
sick.
at a club. But at any rate, yeah, no, I got in. So the leads and stuff like that, the lead guitar was more of a, kind of a jump and more challenging, because there was, you know, just more complex.
Right.
Um, and then, sort of in my senior year of high school, I gravitated into even a more heady type of music, which was jazz, and started listening. Like, a lot of my friends made fun of me. I started listening to like John Coltrane and Charlie Parker, and you know Getz and Gilberto, and stuff like that. Some, like I said, pretty sophisticated choices for a kid, but like, we don't know. These days kids are pretty sophisticated, but
Right.
um
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like a kid will come up and surprise you like that. But like that makes sense. Kind of the progression of like if you're kind of understanding where all these sounds are coming from, like it makes sense. Like the kind of like the Hendrix approach and like the more excitement with what guitar can do, and then the next evolution is what more music can do. And Coltrane and Parker, that once you plant that seed, you study those for life. You never really. Um, I don't know if those ever stop being intriguing in some way, but
well, it's weird because I would like also kind of break apart these guitar players, and like, before I actually, started to train, and go to school and stuff like that. I kind of like was breaking apart these guitar players stylistically. I was like, okay, so Jimi Hendrix, he knows like what chord variation lies underneath the pentatonic scale, and he's able to articulate these notes in major and minor pentatonics underneath whatever chord variation up and down the neck. He has vast knowledge of all, five positions up and down the neck. Um, and then there's Jimmy Page. It's like, okay, this guy, he's actually a modal player. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And he's bringing in more the seven notes of like the diatonic scale, and in a modal way, along with mixing in some of the blues influence with the major and minor pentatonic scales, um, and as well as like uh, Eric Clapton and Cream and stuff. He's just mixing. I was like, okay, so he's mixing the two, the major and minor pentatonic scales. Um, but analyzing these guitar players, and then once I started getting into jazz, I was like, holy shit! I mean, it's like there's these extensions of chords and like these other kind of like notes. I knew about blue notes from playing like bluegrass, like in Missouri, and in the blues, there were notes that were sort of in the cracks and stuff like that. But yeah, you get into playing giant steps by John Coltrane and some of these Charlie Parker solos and stuff like that. You're like, oh shit, the circle of fifths, and I mean, it's heady stuff.
yeah.
And honestly, like once I got into Los Angeles and kind of got into, I had already gone, lived with my jazz teacher for a year and studied intensely, all my inversions and my triads and double stops and scales and modes and extending chords and, all this stuff, and then I went to music school in Los Angeles. So by the time I got to the circle jerks, I was like a full on, like almost like professor type of musician, um, which made it very easy for me to play that kind of music. But the challenging thing about it, like I said earlier on, was the dexterity and the speed that it took to play this, and the technique that it took to play this stuff accurately and tightly. So that's what I found was the meat or the tenderloin of the circle jerks music, was like intense energy, speed, and dexterity. And I thought, well, this is cool. This is challenging. I could see the merit in this. But yeah, everybody made fun of me because of my knowledge of music.
It's It's interesting. Like, well, one, who was your jazz teacher before you went to school for it?
He was a guy named Peter Sprague. He's a San Diego-based musician,
Okay.
um,
Was he a guitar player or was he just a jazz musician?
guitar player.
Okay.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like in living with him, I totally parroted everything that the guy did, mimicked his lifestyle. He had a disciplined lifestyle where he would wake up and he would do uh, I don't know, like an hour of hatha yoga. I learned how to do yoga from him. He had a vegetarian lifestyle, I mean, diet, and he was also into meditation. And so I basically, and then he'd take a run on the beach for like 5 miles, and I basically mimicked the guy's whole routine. Um, and he would practice his scales and arpeggios for a couple hours. He lived in the basement of the house, and I could hear it coming up through the floorboards. And then in the afternoons, I would spend my afternoons transcribing these, Charlie Parker and John Coltrane solos. And, I had a tape recorder that would take them down to half speed, so that I could hear what was really going on. And I would learn them by ear, but then I would transcribe them and learned how to write music and read. I never quite got sight to the level of being a sight reader,
It's
but
hard. It's hard, man. Like just to transcribe it like that, to dictate it and transcribe it, and like, it's one thing to hear and play it, which is a whole separate. That's the bit, being able to play it and play it back and understand how that works. But to write it down and be able to convey it, like, it's a whole nother thing. It's almost a little. It's almost the opposite of what it is. Like, when you look at a sheet of music, that's exactly how someone feels written out, exactly how it should be felt. You know what I mean? Like, there's no real slip up when someone writes it down like that. And with the real book and with whatever, of course, there's like accidents, and maybe that's not what the composer meant. But like, ideally, like, it's supposed to be exactly, this is how I feel, and this is how. If you want to understand how I feel, play that. And
yeah,
like, it's almost robotic though, and like, and it's hard. It's hard to like, and I don't know if it's a guitar player thing, like, because I think pianists, you kind of learn to read and play, like read and convey at the same time. Where guitar
yeah.
is a very like feel based thing.
Well, I would get scolded because, like even in jazz band in high school, I got called into my music teacher's office, and he kind of scolded me because he recognized that I was doing cooler voicings than the ones that were written, and
Yeah.
I was taking my cues from the horn stabs and all this stuff to like get a better like voicing and a voicing that would embellish and accentuate what was going on a little bit better. Um, and he basically said, "You're never going to make a dime in music." And honestly, with my jazz teacher, when I lived it with my jazz teacher too, um, I think I learned that, hook or by crook, it's like you gotta like kind of get things done. And if you use some rock and roll tricks, or if you use whatever tricks you have in your bag to do it, then
Mm.
that's that's gonna have to be okay.
Right. Well, yeah, because it's entertaining, it's fun. You want to see it. There's got to be some flash to it, and like, I don't know. It's definitely a fake it till you make it sitch. Especially, I don't know why it is guitar players are so feel based, and like maybe it's the kind of the forerunners in guitar playing. Like Hendrix, and you pay like the big rock guys. You said you started like digging into. They're not reading. Like, they're definitely feeling.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like like these traditionalists, these people that are say there are these rules that you must follow and you must play it exactly this way. There's a lot of that in traditional like bluegrass and
Right.
Latin music and jazz, and it's like, well, but that's it to me. It's like it's boring and it's not innovative, and to stay within that sort of like box, it's not really trying to expand the potential of what you can do. And that's where I kind of like broke out of jazz. I thought to myself, well, this is super traditional stuff, and it kind of all, don't take this the wrong way, listeners, but it kind of all sounded the same to me, and it sounded a little stodgy and traditional and conventional to me. And I literally was like, it was kind of the same thing with the painting. I was literally like, well, how am I going to get out there on stage and like get like, the validation and all the attention that I so crave, from putting on entertaining, because I was also in tandem to all that stuff. I was also always a class clown and an entertainer, and like I would do impressions of people, and like was wildly just like goofy and silly. And subsequently I also kind of acted in some movies and stuff like that. And I think it all translates into whatever medium that you put it in. Like if you look at yourself and you say, well, what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I'm good at? What are these overarching characteristics that I have? You could pretty much figure out what you're going to be and what you're going to do.
Yeah. Did it kind of speak to you, like knowing that you dive into all this, or was this kind of just like an experiment, and those traits were every time you tried something new were coming more clear? Does that make sense? Like,
Well,
uh,
like literally when I talked about urgent necessity, I would just, if there was an opportunity, somebody presented that opportunity to me, I would say yes. Like, will you please do my movie score? I would say yes. And then I would learn how to orchestrate, and compose a film score. You know what I mean? If somebody said, will you act in my movie? I would say yes. And then I would prepare myself to the best of my ability without having any training, but knowing that I'm a natural sort of ham, and I don't really give
yeah,
a hoot what people like, think of me, Um, so if there's 50 people standing around with lights and cameras and all this stuff, I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway. Um, but yeah, just if you get if somebody presents an opportunity, you say yes, and then you figure out how to do it and come in as prepared as you possibly can be. Overly prepared. And I guess all the things that I had done were great preparation for all the things that were presented to me.
right. Well, are you hip to Bruce Lee at all? It's a.
Huh?
Are you hip to Bruce Lee at all?
Of course.
Cool. So like when I started studying music, my first guitar teacher was like, "You gotta read this book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do," and like that kind of messed up my brain. And like Bruce has got this whole concept of like taking in what you need and shedding what you don't, and the idea that the classically trained man is bound to tradition. And
Right.
everything you just said kind of like resonates with that, because like I think it's, you want to learn all those forms and shapes and chords, but like if you stick to that, that's as far as you're going to get. Like so much of jazz is 2-5-1. Oh, well, now our tritone substitution 2-5-1. So much of bluegrass or blues music is, or I guess with blues it's all but 1-4-5. And like it's interesting, like all these different styles of music have standards that everyone like kind of like abides to. And like and I found that, because I've always, I don't know, been a fan of everything, and like when I started to like really study jazz, that's when punk really hit me hard, and I was like, oh, this is it. Like I'd be working with my guitar teacher talking about Coltrane, and like I'd be like, but the Ramones, like that it hit me way later than it should have. Like, but I noticed that a lot of jazz guys didn't reciprocate like that enthusiasm for like punk music as maybe punk guys do. Like
Right.
like I know you've done some work with Mike Watt, which put a pin
Mhm.
in because I got some questions about, but he loves Coltrane. Like I don't
Sure.
I don't know if I know anyone who loves Coltrane more than Watt, but like I don't know if it reciprocates on the other end for jazzers. Did you kind of notice that as you're kind of transitioning into like breaking some forms?
Well, no, I think there's a lot of, like I was saying before, there's a lot of snobbery that goes into some of these more traditional
Yeah.
types of music. You know what I mean? And I see the beauty and like get to the heart of whatever type of music there is. And I want to be diverse. I when I moved to Los Angeles, I joined a funk band down in South Central Los Angeles and played funk music. Coming from a jazz background, I was like, well, there's something to be learned from this. The jazz stuff is for the head, but this stuff is for the soul, and it teaches you about rhythm and counterpoint,
Right.
um, and the smoothness of the groove and stuff like that. And then I got into playing Latin music, and subsequently bought a bunch of these traditional Latin music instruments that were in their traditional tunings, and never changed the tuning. And and learned about rhythm and you know um, non-Western music. Um, which subsequently took me, like I said, playing with Flor Amargo the other night. I've played with several Latin artists and done music for films that were made in Mexico and stuff like that. And that's also what keyed Joe Strummer into me initially when I was first asked by Joe to play the Latin instruments, all the stringed instruments on the Walker soundtrack. Because we had traveled to Spain together. We were on location, and I was gobbling up all the flamenco and buying, flamenco guitars and Spanish lauds and stuff like that. And, we went to Central America, and, I continued my search, because I was just floored by Latin music. Something about it just, and I carry that with me in pretty much everything I do. Um, but just the passion of it, and so all those things just add up to, you know I don't know what it adds up to, being diverse.
It's enthusiasm. It's the excitement for something new, and like when did okay to kind of dive into that. Like when so as you're like studying jazz, like what was the kind of first instrument out of the guitar realm that was like kind of string based that made that like like start the addiction to figure out other instruments happen? Was it the Spanish instruments? Was it the Latin music? Like or was there one in particular?
Well, every step of the way, it's like you become like a baby again that doesn't
Yeah.
know anything. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
But what I will say is the main factor in becoming a diverse and knowledgeable musician is curiosity for everything. So I was never closed minded, and that's why I shrugged away from conventionalism or rules or stuff like that. And it's like I also always knew that it's like, well, you could learn a song and then you'll know that song, or you could learn music and you'll know everything. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Because like with when you take like a flamenco music, you're like, oh, this is they go to 12. That's weird. Why is everything in 12? Why is everything doing 5? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's fascinating. But you wouldn't think of it if you only learned Stairway to Heaven.
No.
Like that's so cool. So like How'd you meet? So you met Joe traveling?
No, Joe, I was doing some session work on the film Sid and Nancy. I play all the
Okay.
guitar and the actual score of the movie.
Sick.
Um, and Joe was contributing music to that film as well. Some of his first solo outings, he had just kind of broke up with the Clash, and Alex asked him to do so. Alex Cox, the director, asked him to contribute some songs. So I met him, coming and going from the same studio that I was working at. And then we acted in a film together called Straight to Hell that was filmed in Spain. That's when we first started kind of becoming friends. We both contributed music separately to that film. Um, and then we're on location in Nicaragua for 3 months and lived together in a house in Granada. And I think Joe just saw my curiosity and my enthusiasm. I always had a guitar in my hand. I was always searching for influences, always kind of pushing the envelope of what I already knew. I'm trying to expand my knowledge. And I got the call from Joe that he wanted me to, that he had gotten the job to compose some music for Walker, and asked me if I could come up to San Francisco to record at Russian Hill with him. And he said, specifically, bring your Spanish guitar. I was
Nice.
like, bring my Spanish guitar. I was like, I'm going to bring my Spanish guitar. I'm going to bring my guitarrón. I'm going to bring my vuela. I'm going to bring my charanga. I'm going to bring my bajo sexto. Uh, you know, I'm going to bring a lot more than my Spanish guitar.
That's amazing, and it comes through on that soundtrack too. Is there Bazooki on Smash Everything?
No, there's
Okay.
no Bazooki on it. Um, you know, I didn't start playing the Bazooki at that point.
Okay.
Um, that's something that I've been playing for, I'd say, mm, close to 20 years now. Um, but the Bazooki I got as kind of a joke. I was making prank calls to music stores to ask if they had Bazookis, and I was like, "Are they big? Can I touch them?" And I eventually called this music store down in Culver City called Marina Music, and the Greek guy answered the phone. He said, "Oh yes, they're some of them are big, some of them are medium size." And I said, "Can I touch them?" He said, "Yes, come into the store. You can touch all the Bazookis." And I went down there and I played it, and he showed me a traditional Greek scale on it, and I was off and running. But one day somebody said to me, he said, "Well, what would it sound like if you actually kind of played hillbilly music on this thing?" I was like, "Oh yeah." And I thought about it, hillbilly music. It's like, what is the origin of hillbilly music? Wasn't it? Uh, uh, it was all these immigrants coming in from their different, you know, uh, homelands
Mhm.
with their instruments and getting together, um, and forming this new type of music. Um, and so I thought, well, yeah, I'm sure, like if somebody came from Greece and went to Appalachia, that the Bazooki would be as relevant to hillbilly music as the mandolin and the violin and the banjo.
Right. Yeah.
And it's actually called the Greek banjo
Huh.
by some people. And so it's like, well, yes, and you can make it sound like a mandolin if you travel up the neck high enough, and there's droning strings. You can actually make it sound like a banjo.
Hmm.
And I started kind of exploring that again, expanding on the tradition of the instrument.
Right. Well, playing music, you're using wider concepts of music because like banjo's all drone, and but you find drone on oud and other instruments, and like the timbre of like I'm trying to think of like a tremolo or like a very percussive like mandolin bit. and I've never thought of the Bazooki as like that, but I can now that you describe it, you could really it could really do both. But that's playing music, and that's cool.
Yeah.
That's so hanging out to kind of jump back with Joe. So you're hanging out with Joe, and you guys do the walker. Like, when did some of the other like the earthquake weather and stuff like that? Did that kind of just roll out naturally from that, or like?
Well, yeah. I mean, due to the my curiosity and the diversity of instruments that I was playing, I played pretty much everything on all stringed instruments on that soundtrack, and he even threw me in with the orchestra because there was a guy named Dick Bright that was arranging for strings, and there was Michael Spiro playing, all the percussion and like, these pianists and these really, really excellent musicians. He threw me into the mix on the first side, which was mainly more kind of Latin jazz, and saw that I was able to hold my own in that arena as well. But I think he just, was like impressed by my curiosity and my diversity and my love of all music, because Joe was not like one of these punk rock cop type people who was like, oh, it must be punk rock, it must be hardcore, and that's not punk and blah blah blah. Who gives a darn? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He had a similar quality, which was this curiosity for all types of music, and it expanded into different cultures and individuals. He just was a super curious guy about everything, and that was impressive to me. And I think he was impressed by me having a similar quality. You know,
That makes sense because uh, listening to like his radio programs and like diving into some of his background, that's there too. And I think the essence of like what punk is kind of how you described what hillbilly music is, or like what traditional folk is. It's all these people coming together and just doing their own thing based on how they know and meshing it with whoever's around. And like
yeah,
it does get super formulaic. Everyone finds their 2 5 1s in life and decides that they know where that resolves. That's great. But like and to kind of jump into like or jump back to how you talked about the Beatles finding all these intricate things every couple seconds to put in their arrangements, like the music for like Earthquake Weather and the Mescaleros and all that Strummer stuff later had that in there, but in this like
yeah.
worldly like you this obsession for different sounds and stuff is put into that music, and like
Well, look, the doorway into it for me was his albums, the Clash's album Sandinista.
right,
Because speaking of the Beatles and comparing the Clash to the Beatles, I saw Sandinista as being the Clash's White Album. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I really heard many, many different styles, and it cued me into the fact that those guys were interested in everything. And that's where I really gained respect for the Clash. And I went back through their catalog. So I went backwards through the Clash's catalog.
hmm. That
Yeah.
yeah, no, that makes that's because that's it's like you seem to be the personality of seeking the bigger and like the vastness of it, and just like that would make sense, that it would appeal to you to go backwards like that. And like I think a lot of people need that comfort of like, oh, I know what this is a punk thing, it sounds like this, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people need that comfort somewhere, and they put it in their music or in their literature or whatever it is, or in their diet. um but you have this amazing kind of uh, going into music, like this vast study of everything. And like I don't I myself diving into music, I found that as well. I was like,
Yeah.
because you start to be like, Hendrix is cool and everything he's doing here, but Bill Monroe is doing the same thing but on mandolin. Like I don't know what
Yeah.
that enthusiasm is, but it's so cool. And when you can recognize it with somebody like Joe and kind of feed into their vision. um so I guess all that being said, like what would be like a lesson, like a grander lesson that was taken from Joe, in that point of your life onward?
Well, I mean, he was an incredible lyricist for one thing, and a poet, in becoming like a songwriter, a solo songwriter. I kind of like learned that, it's like I really have always been like an instrumentalist and a collaborator, somebody who wrote music and melody. But I found that the lyrics were important, and every stanza, every line had to have weight to it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I started to look at kind of like the way that Joe would write lyrics, and I envisioned myself kind of like diving into this cave and like coming up with these gems. So I would ask myself lyrically, well, is it true? Yes. Okay, it's true. Is it necessary? Yes, it's necessary. If it's not true, it's not necessary. You know what I mean?
Right.
And also like thinking about poetry. The thing about that I learned from Joe too about lyrics is that the way words sing are very important.
Mm.
The way they feel coming out of your mouth, they don't get stuck in your mouth. You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah.
poetry. Poetry is more about the sound of the words and how the words, roll and flow. Um, and so to write lyrics that were true and necessary and poetic, based on the sound of how they and the rhythm of how they flowed out of your mouth became equally important to me. And I learned how to be a lyricist. So now it's like I can be completely autonomous, in what I do. And also, I went from flat picking into to being a right hand guy, like a finger picker. And
Mm.
again, going back to like I'd flat picked all my life. And about 16 years ago, and this is pretty late in the game, I I challenged myself to never use a pick at home. And I turned myself into a drooling baby again and learned right hand technique so that I could play the bass, the melody, and the chords simultaneously, and basically the drums. I never really even think of guitar as a guitar. In fact, even in my jazz training, I never really listened to jazz guitarists. I listened to saxophonists and pianists. And when I think of the guitar, I listen to a lot of classical radio now, and classical. I think of it as a small orchestra.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. Well, it's all right there. That's fascinating. Like the just the beginner's mind always go back to that. To kind of expand like uh it sounds like, I mean, it doesn't, from what you described, you have this very like, you see a thing and you go discipline into it with like with something like writing, everyone's got their own like kind of approach to it, but I feel like it's something like in academic music, you don't really spend too much time practicing creativity. You don't really like, they don't really harp on like practicing the emotional expression and conveyance of your music as much as the technique and understanding of it. So when it comes to something like songwriting, did you have like a routine for yourself? Like would you practice, like not practice, would you write something every day, or would you just kind of cuz leading into like your solo record you're putting out, like what, did you have a routine for being creative like this, or did you just kind of let inspiration hit and then feed off it then?
Well, the lack of the preciousness is the enemy of being a songwriter. Like honestly, it's like you hear about this, spend 10,000 hours doing something. So, I would just write songs and let them be whatever they presented themselves as. Like honestly, it's just like I'm a receiver, for whatever transmissions are being transmitted. And that being said, you have to, if you're going to be an abstract painter, you need to learn form, and you need to learn how to actually paint, do figure drawing, and have a background in that stuff. And so all of my background in diversity led me to the point where I could think of things in an abstract way and in an obtuse way, where literally I'm just thinking about, so all that stuff is like a roadmap that goes in the glove box of the car, but you're now intuitively feeling your way through and thinking about shapes and colors and the vibration between two strings, whatever intervals that you're playing, and chords, and what emotions those bring. So you can get into a more abstract type of thinking. And literally, I think of like what I do as like sound paintings, and I literally take, this very seriously, that it's like, okay, so I have this vast amount of colors that I can use, and this technique and stuff. So I can play a lot, and I could add a lot of different colors, but that's not going to make a good sound painting. What I need to do is I need to decrease my palette so it's a smaller palette, and just use 3 or 4 colors on it. Now you can mix those colors, but the limits that you put on yourself are what define you as having an individual sound. It's not your vast options. It's how you limit yourself in the space that you create. And developing, certain techniques that are just your own. You know what I mean?
Right.
So my goal is to become a recognizable, have a voice as an artist that's recognizable. From the first notes that you hear, you'll know that it's me, because of the limitations that I employ when I write.
Right. That's beautiful. It's the seek of self knowledge, and like it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like if you'd compare it to like sculpting, you chisel away from the what becomes the figure. Um, that that's awesome. Kind of like a maybe before jumping more into the new record. With like working with groups like the Circle Jerks, and Mike Watt, and like what were some kind of like takeaways from maybe that apply to writing your own music in the context that it is now, from like someone like Keith Morris or Mike Watt?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's like, please, fans of punk rock, please don't take this the wrong way, but breaking your arm off playing downstrokes at 200 beats per minute and having it be just basically one dynamic, fast and loud, really, to me, started to make me think, well, what do I want to do? And what I want to do in my spare time is something beautiful, and the polar opposite of that, which is to create space, play softly and gently, and try to create the most beautiful chord voicings and embellishments that I can, with the deepest emotions that are underlying all that anger and aggression. And so that's my answer to punk. That's me being. That's what I'm saying. Punk has informed me to be punk enough to do the exact opposite. To basically uh, uh, challenge people to call me a fucking to call me a pussy for what I'm doing. And say, oh, what's happened to him? He's gone soft. But it's not soft. Like, honestly, I believe that talking about the things that people think and they would never dare say, or playing, as softly and gently and beautifully as you can, people are walking around being tough with their arms crossed and not open to these things. And I think it's very, very punk to challenge people to drop their arms and become open to hearing some of these deeper emotions and softer, more gentle and sad emotions, because this is really at the heart of everything,
Right. No, it's the yin and yang of the whole experience. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't appreciate the soft stuff until you've rocked it out for so long, or vice versa. And it is really profound that the kind of punk thing is to go against the norm, but once the norm that's been gone against is gone against again, those arms across. That was a very good way to put it. And so that's a beautiful takeaway from playing all these different styles and developing your own. Um,
Well, and now punk has become conventional.
right,
Punk is pervasive in all pop culture and fashion and magazines and, film and everything, and people's attitudes and stuff like that. So once it becomes popular, it's like, for me, I'm like, well, I'm no longer interested in it now, that it's popular, well, I'm interested in making a living, and going out there and playing for those crowds and playing this music. But I want to do the opposite of what's popular and take the chance to, do something that, maybe is, challenging.
right, right. I mean, that would be the next. That's the next most punk thing to do.
So it is punk rock.
Yeah, it
I
is.
consider it as being punk rock, what I'm doing now.
Um, Now, one thing I found really interesting, I read when you went to record these songs, the producer you're working with when you're running the demos told you to drop everything a minor third and do it in
Yeah.
like speaking, which is very like I the kind of song about songs is such a beautiful arrangement, and where the bazooki sits and how the whole song is built around it, and where your voice sits, it's like, and then when everything kicks in the chorus, it's so well done. Um, was that at first like, did that kind of like just fit and feel good to kind of sing like that, or was it weird at first to be that like that almost vulnerable and lack of emotive?
Well, here's the thing: the album was made. All the guys that were on that album, they're all jazz trained guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that album was recorded drums, bass, uh, whatever, piano or keyboards. He'd either be sitting in a Wurlitzer or an upright piano, bass, drums, and I was we did it to tape, to 2-inch tape on a 16 track 2-inch machine. And so I was placed into a small isolation booth with a giant condenser, mic on my vocal and another mic facing my guitar, right?
Hmm.
So I'll go back to the statement about limiting your options. You know what I mean? Um, so at any rate, it's like everything that I did had to count, and it's like I had to play finger pick very gently and softly, and with good technique and even technique, and sing at a volume that you know wouldn't interfere with that as well. The thing that I learned and what Gus was trying to get me to do was to sing without necessarily being dramatic and lots of vibrato, um, and sing almost at a whispered volume, so that the blend between the guitar. What happens is if here's here's the technical thing. What happens if you play the guitar very softly and gently? You'll hold your technique, and with all that headroom, the guitar sounds huge. Now
Mm.
the same would happen with the voice. If Gus took me down a minor third, it would I would be forced to sing it softer and more in a sort of like speaking,
Right.
sort of like my speaking voice. So I never have to remember what my voice is. It's in creating your voice. It's like, well, what's the closest to your speaking range? And it's like, you know, I just learned like, wow, if I sing it that softly, with all that headroom, once you employ outboard gear to it, like compressors and stuff like that, it becomes huge, and you hear your voice becomes an instrument. You hear your resonating chamber and sort of the grit of your voice more, the
Mm.
husk of your voice more. Um, and subsequently through that experience, it was very awkward for me to come in and change my keys and take them down a minor third. Not only for playing the guitar, but also singing. But there again, urgent necessity. This is happening. There's no takebacks. I've got to do this, and I've got to do it right. Um, because everybody is playing, and we did one or two takes of each song and chose the best out of one or two. With no auto tuning on the voice or anything like that, or
Yeah.
any kind of editing or corrections. So you had to just have that urgent necessity. It better be good, you know?
Yeah. And imagine even like with how the performance was like an auto-tuned bit or a I can't the program that slightly fixes pitch would be way more noticeable in a setting like that and wouldn't serve it as well. Um, that's because just there's only a few tracks out, but they resonate so emotionally deep. I was thinking the song about songs. Is there a song that you found?
Oh, too many to mention. And, there's a reason why it's so vague in making that statement. And it's like, I kind of don't want to reveal the magic trick of it. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
But that song, the spaciousness of it and the vagueness of the whatchamajigger, um, the vagueness of what I'm saying allows people to inform their own decisions about what songs have saved their life and what songs are important to them. And I made a great concerted effort not to put any kind of ideas into people's heads, and it was a good decision to make, because
yeah,
everybody has those songs, and I've been approached so many times about that particular song, about how it helped them through a divorce or the death of a loved one, or the birth of their child. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
that's the power of what I was talking about before too, with the lyrics is, diving down and getting those stanzas and thinking of diving into a cave of gems, doing it poetically and leaving lots of space for people to dream. That, and that's the reason why I also put a lot of instrumental sections in my songs and play them at slow tempos so that there's an immense amount of space, um, because I believe that's where the dreams happen, in between the notes.
mm,
You know.
yeah. That's really profound. Like even so, I went to school for music therapy, and I got certified in NMT, which is neurologic music therapy, and like there's this whole like the concept of the 5 to 1, like that resolve the form being resolved causes comfort in the brain, right? The brain likes to like predict what's about to happen. There's like a dopamine spike, part of why music's so important to people. And like but also put it in a different context, like if you put a message on top of that, your brain's already figured out where the movement's going to go, so what's on top is being heard. And to put it in the way where you have space to think about what's being heard and and let it resonate and let it hit. Yeah, I've never thought about like kind of analyzing that until right now of how well this new record of yours is doing that with the statements being said, and like that's a beautiful concept that the dreams are in between. That's really cool.
Yeah, and there there should be lulls and there should be peaks. Um, and I also think of those spaces like in between where a verse starts or a chorus starts or an instrumental part ends and you add a bar or whatever as punctuation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
If you're telling a story, you need to punctuate the story, right?
right,
Um, and so I think that you can do the same thing with space in music. You know?
right. Like Victor Wooten's got this bit. If there's no rest, every even in life you need rest. We go to bed every night.
Yeah,
And if not, the day that happened before doesn't really seem like you don't remember much from it.
yeah.
Um, wow, awesome, Xander. Thank you so much for sitting and chatting with me. I really appreciate this. I know you told me you have a video coming out and a new single that's going to drop.
Yeah, I just made the video for Song About Songs, and there's a video for My Dear Blue that's out. Um, and I also did rework the solo version of a song that I used to really enjoy playing with Joe Strummer called Straight to Hell. Those videos are all out on YouTube. I'm currently making a video for a song I wrote called "I Have Loved the Story of My Life." That's going to be out on the 17th of November, and the single's going to be released on the 17th of November. Um, I don't want to give away what the premise is, but it's going to be incredibly epic. Um, and you know, after that, I'll probably release one more single, and in February, my entire album's going to be dropping, and we're making currently making vinyl, a gatefold vinyl for it, and the artwork is beautiful. There's liner notes by Chris Morris, who's a Grammy award winning liner note guy and journalist for many publications that you've probably read his reviews and stuff like that, and artwork by my friend AJ Nesselrod, who I had do some charcoal sketches of me and some oil paintings and stuff like that. Um, and all the lyrics for every song will be, on the sleeve, so that people can read along with that and read the credits and the special thanks. I wanted to do it in a way where it was like when we remember as kids, like buying those records, and you put the record on the turntable and you look at the artwork and the special thanks and the individual credits for the musicians and read the liner notes, and you know so that for me it was important to not just have it released digitally, but have something that you could hold in your hand, that reflects what the music is. So I took great care to design the album in that way that we remember that those precious moments of bringing those albums home, and how impactful they were to our lives. Because I think that's something that's lost in the whole streaming world.
Definitely.
And I took great care in sequencing the album so that it is a long play experience, and as side one and side two, it makes sense, as a story, as an overall story.
Right, right. And it is sad that the kind of the how music's consumed now is so single based and so like digital digital based. Not that there's any problem. Like a lot of these programs are fantastic. What I'm recording this with right now is amazing. Like, so not to take away from these great advancements and these positive aspects of it, but there's definitely to like an overall narrative to an album like that. It is a shame that it's not really appreciated like that anymore. So I think that's a fantastic that you would preserve it like that and present it like that. Um,
Well, as a veteran musician, it's like I've been making uh, records for close to almost 40 years, and I've seen it transition from cassettes and vinyl into CDs, and then streaming and blah blah blah. It's like, dude, if you don't, if you want longevity in anything, you have to roll with the changes. I mean,
right.
if you're like going to be a silent film actor and transition into the talkies or whatever, you have to be prepared to do that. So having the ability to pivot in the face of advancement, and sort of get into the flow of however music is being marketed. Yes, I'm releasing singles and videos and releasing things streaming at this point, and working the social media in the way that I'm sort of being guided to do, because that's how people market their music. And the great thing about it is that it's now fallen into to the hands of the artists.
Yeah.
So if you can develop a knowledge for that and get good at all those things, it's all in your hands. You can be responsible for all your successes and all your failures, and not point a finger at some, you know, evil record company or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, that being said, it's just it is the way it is. So again, there's an urgent necessity.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is happening. There are no
Urgent.
takebacks. This is the way music is being marketed now. So you might as well, do it.
Beautiful. And well, I started this whole podcast to like seek insight and inspiration, and I'm like all jittery. This has been I'm all like I've had my cup of coffee of inspiration, and like this is so Xander. This has been fantastic. I really really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And it's like, this is a very unique style of interview. Generally, people are just asking me about my history, but not like getting into the machinistic, process of what I do. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I hope that your students listen, and I hope to inspire people to do the best that they possibly can to make the best and most emotional, impactful music that they can make. Because really, it's like, it's the most powerful art form there is. Nobody ever says, wow, that painting really helped me through a hard time, or that book helped me through a hard time. It's always about the music.
Yeah.
There's something about that art form that is so incredibly powerful, and I have so much reverence for it. Um, and I think that anybody who does it should have reverence and take care, with
Yeah.
it, because it is really something that is powerful and to be revered.
I agree. No, definitely. And it's interesting because it if like all the other art forms, and this is the kind of schooling I learned, like the music just the sonic approach of music makes your brain work in a different way. And
Yeah,
part of that is that emotion, those hippocampus thing, like there's a lot of things going on, and like there's just something like out of looking at how your brain reacts to it, the process itself, there's just something to it. Um but yeah, no, that's so cool. This has been so cool. Perfect. All right, man. Well, exciting. That's so cool. Ah, cool.
thanks, Dave.
All right. Well, thanks, Xander. You have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, buddy.
All right. Later.
Bye.